Hello and welcome to Lady Dynamite Creates. This is Tiffany, and today I have a very special collab for you guys. My patrons and I decided on the theme of witches, and with that being the only stipulation, we could really let our imaginations run wild. Before we jump in, I wanted to share with you the awesome dolls my talented patrons created. Rainbow Fine Art, the Oak Magpie, Camimtel, Rainbow Fine Art again, and Lady Lunar Emeries. Be sure to check out all the wonderful creations by my Collab Partners. I will leave all of their social media in the description box below. Alright witches, without further ado, let's get started. For my base doll, I decided to go with one of the new G3 Dracularas. I'm really in love with the body shape and I wanted my witch to be a curvy girl, so she seemed like the obvious choice. I do really like the creepover edition of this doll. I think the hair buns on it are so adorable, I just wish the hair was better quality. To get her prepped, I buzz her hair down really short and then plop her down head first into a cup of boiled water. I'm sure you've seen from Delightful's video, but removing the head on these new G3s is quite tricky. I found the trick is to pull until you get over the first hump of the neck peg, then use your tweezers to coax the vinyl around the prongs. With the head removed, I can now use my flathead screwdriver to help scrape out the plugs. Since they melt the ends of the hair now, the plugs can be a little bit stubborn. I remove the bits of hair through the neck hole with my needle nose pliers. Using 100% acetone, I can remove all of her factory paint. I really do love the new G3 Draculaura face sculpt. The ears are absolutely adorable, and while I feel like the eyes are a bit large, there's still enough freedom there to make them smaller when I'm working. Do you have a favorite of the G3 line yet? Before rerooting, I gave her scalp a coat of paint. This way, if there's any scalp poking through, it's not noticeable and will blend in with the hair. I didn't have enough of one single color to reroot her with, so I'm using a combination of these three colors from the Doll Planet hair. I begin rooting with the silver gray color first because I had the most of it. I make sure to leave holes open to add in the purple and pink later. I'll use more purple underneath and more pink on the top to act as natural high and low lights. I love how these colors turned out, and while dealing with multiple colors may be a hassle, the result was definitely worth it. I secure the plugs with a bit of liquid fusion glue. I squeeze some down into the head and then swirl it about, making sure to touch all those plugs. I set the head aside for a few days to allow it to have time to dry. Now we're going to jump over to her clothes and we're going to get started with the bralette. The cups are made up of 2 layers and I'm going to sew down the 2 sides on these, leaving the top and the bottom open. Once sewn, I flip these right sides out and I iron them flat. I trim up the seam allowance that pokes out the bottom, then I insert a cord up through the bottom opening through the top opening and pull until the desired length is reached. I tack it down with stitches and I sew a gathering stitch along the bottom of the cups. I gather the bottom of the cups and attach it with the right side spacing to the band that wraps around the body. I now hem the bottom edge of the band with fabric glue. I finish it off with a closure and some embellishments. Since the skirt I had planned is a simple skater style, I wanted to add some visual interest. I used my Cricut to cut out flocked black and gold heat transfer vinyl decals in a witchy theme to add to the skirt. The skirt was super simple. After hemming the top of the waistband, I attach it to the skirt and then just add a closure. Off camera, I made her some stockings, and I figured out that Draculaura's curvy figure comes with the same pitfalls as they do in real life. The stockings just wouldn't stay up. To fix this problem, I sewed a makeshift garter belt into her skirt. There are 2 ribbons that are stitched into the waistband that extend to the top of the stockings and hold them up. Now for those witchy accessories. We're going to start with the hat first. I've cut my pattern pieces out of 2mm craft foam and I use hot glue to close up the edges for the top of the hat. By the way, this pattern is available for free for my Cherry Bomb tier patrons, along with all the clothing patterns I used today. I close the cone up as neatly as I can, and once I reach the top, I trim away any excess that's still poking out. I cut notches all along the bottom of the cone, and then I squish it down on top of my brim and mark where this is going to be. I apply my glue and connect the 2 pieces. I flip the hat over and cut the notches in the underside and secure those notches down to the inside of the hat. To cover up that ugly seam, I'm now going to take this strip of foam and glue it into place on top. I make sure to start at the seam of the cone so that it's easier to hide later. To hide the seam on the top of the hat, I'm going to be going with a slouchy style and scrunch the cone and glue it into place and tuck away that seam. Finally, before I begin painting, I'm going to give the hat some texture. I crumple a bit of aluminum foil and heat it with the heat gun and gently press it into the foam. The result is a leather-like texture. Now for the painting, and before I busted out the acrylics, I first coated this in Plasti-Dip. This seals in the foam, otherwise it's highly absorbent and will continue to soak up paint, and you will be doing a ton of coats of your acrylics. I finished the hat off with some crystals and some paper flowers for embellishment. Now for the thing that really had me stressing, the shoes. Getting these modeled in 3D was no easy task, but after countless iterations, I finally had something I could work with. There are some things I will be going back and changing before I offer them in my Etsy shop, but be assured G3 shoes are on their way. With the 3D model ready to go, I jump onto my Elegoo Mars 3 resin printer and get them started. One might ask, Tiffany, why so many shoes? Well, these were the Dynamite tier reward for my patrons. Once I have these removed from the build plate, I toss them onto their alcohol bath for their first washing. This gets most of the resin residue off, but I find they usually need a second cleaning once the supports are removed. I toss the shoes down into my bowl and cover them in boiling water. This makes the supports easier to remove and less likely to cause pitting on the model. I give them their second cleaning before dropping them under the UV light for their final cure. Now they're ready and they just need to be painted. I kept with the black and gold color story and gave them black bottoms and gold on top. But now that I watch the footage, I do wish that I would have reversed it. Do you ever find that you wish you did things differently when you step away from a project? I always try to look at it as an opportunity for growth, but sometimes it's just so hard to do. Now on to the face-up, and these are all of the products that I've used, various brands of watercolor pencils and pastels, and there is a full list of my supplies in the description box too if you're interested. The gilding paint though, just mwah, MVP of this face-up. I've sprayed her with 3 coats of Mr. Super Clear UV Cut Flat, and I wait about 30 minutes in between each coat, or 5 hours because I was distracted. Once the final layer is ready, I get started. The first thing I tackle is her eyes. I struggle a lot with symmetry, so it helps to do this first, so if there is a lot of erasing, I'm not erasing my progress. I don't know why I say if, it's always when. I cut out lots of stuff like that in the final video because of time. You don't want to see me just sit here redrawing the eyes 4 times. I begin to sketch in her iris placement once I'm happy with the overall eye shape. My idea for this was a golden eye, like a cat's, but without the vertical pupil. My concept is that she's a witch, but rather than having a cat familiar, she has a connection with felines in general and uses them for sight. Before I start working with pastels, I coat the vinyl in a layer of colorless blender from Pan Pastel. I find this extremely helpful with blending out pastels on the vinyl. I layer up the contour and shading around the eyes and slowly build up colors. I add a pop of color to her lips and cheeks, but went a little too intense and tried to use my magic eraser to knock back the cheek color. I've seen other artists do this successfully, but disaster struck and it scratched the layer of sealant. I thought at first it was just uneven, but alas, it was actual damage and there was no saving it. I wound up very carefully clearing the face with acetone while avoiding the eyes so that I wouldn't have to completely wipe the face. It's always pretty heartbreaking to lose work. I sprayed her again with 2 more layers, then started on pseudo layer 2. I was happier with the color choices and blending the second time around, so it was a good mistake to make in the end. I definitely think the doll turned out better for it. I wanted to say a quick thank you to my friends over on Patreon. Angel Book Walter, B. Burnett, Deborah Sweeney, Stephanie L., Dollicious, Amber S., Art for Tori, Awkward Burb, Bex Mini Studio, Crafting Viking, Camille, Kitsy, and the Oak Magpie. If you are interested in becoming a patron, please check out the link in the description box. With a bit of work, I now have her back to where she was before I messed up, and I can now focus on adding some details to her eyes. With pale blue and yellow pastels, I add color variation to her face. This is an area I'm trying to improve on, and I find facial color maps to be very helpful. I very delicately draw veining on her face. I try to focus on areas with thinner skin where veins are naturally more visible, like around her eyes, forehead, and ears. I seal and start layer 3. The first thing I work on are her eyebrows. Yes, we're finally going to get rid of the emo shaved eyebrow look. I sketch these first in pastels, then I clean the shape up with an eraser. I use a very sharp pencil to add in individual hairs, and I find a harder cord pencil to work best in this situation. I use the same kind of pencil to draw on the eyelashes. When I'm adding them in, I start at the base and I work in quick flicks and raise the pencil while I draw. This way I get the taper that lashes naturally have. I often have to turn and flip the head while I'm working on lashes to be able to draw at a more comfortable angle. I continue the moon motif that's been used throughout her costume and sketch in some facial markings. I work with a very pale gray pencil just in case I mess up, and then go over it with the gilding paint. I also add the gold to her eyes so that they have that reflective quality like cat's eyes do. On the final layer, I darken up her lash line, then I add in her catch lights and highlights to her waterline. She also gets a generous dusting of gold mica powder too. I'm super happy with how the face-up turned out, even if there were some bumps along the way. The reflective gold in her eyes was just the cherry on top. I love how it shines when the light catches it. I knew I wanted a more natural beachy way for her hairstyle, so to achieve this look, I sectioned off portions of the hair, then divided those sections in half. I twisted the divided sections in the same direction, and then I wrapped them around each other in the opposite direction, forming little twist braids. When all the hair was in these twist braids, I boiled a cup of water that I dunked her in. I made sure to hit the part to help flatten it down a bit, as well as the full length of the braids. I set it aside and leave the hair to dry overnight. The next morning I undo the braids and finger comb the hair because just like with real curly hair, if you use a comb it's gonna frizz. I felt like she still needed something more, so a summoning circle stand it is. I bought this wooden box from Hobby Lobby to use as a base. It was the perfect shape and size. I first tackled getting it painted, and I used watered down acrylics so that the wood grain is still visible. I painted on a pentagram in white, but wound up sanding this off and drawing it with a chalk pastel later because I was unhappy with the painted look. I 3D modeled some candles to have around the base of the stand, however the skull was an existing model I modeled candles on top of. I got all the models painted in a creamy white, then I aged it with a wash of burnt sienna. You'll notice that the candles have holes in them. That's because this baby's going to light up. I lay out roughly where I wanted all of the candles and I glued them in place. This was a mistake though, and I should have waited until afterwards and just tried to mark where the holes needed to be. Drilling the holes for the wires caused a lot of the candles to pop off, so I had to glue them on again later anyway. My idea for this was a super beginner-friendly LED project, so we're going to be using fairy lights to light the candles. I pick a spot to start and slide the wire into the hole and through the candle. I pick the next LED in the chain and slide it up through the next hole and candle too. With these in place, I secure them with a bit of UV resin and then glue the candle back down to the base. I continue in this manner until I get all the candles lit. I simply tuck away any unused fairy lights inside the box, and I finish off the top with a saddle stand for the doll. Here is the stand base all finished, and I absolutely love it, and I of course had to use purple lights for the extra cool effect. So you'll remember, here's where we started, and here's where we ended up. I decided to name her Belladonna after the flower because while the nightshade may be beautiful, she is deadly. If you draw the eye of this beauty, you may get a kiss, but she might just kill you if you dare. If you are interested, Belladonna is available for purchase on my Etsy shop, and I'll leave the link in the description box below. Don't forget this is part of a Patreon collab, so be sure to follow the links in the description box to check out their awesome dolls too. I wanted to thank you all so much for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, please be sure to give it a like and subscribe. Comments are always welcome, and I always try to reply and answer your question. That's it for today, and remember, always be creating.